Denver Broncos rookie quarterback Bo Nix continues to stack days at training camp, even though the quarterback position had a little bit of shuffle in the order. We're going to talk about that, some defensive backs standing out, and more defensive line help on the way on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Broncos as we are recapping day 8 of Denver Broncos training camp. The first day this week without any pads on for the Broncos as they practice out there. We're going to be talking about the quarterback rotation, of course, and how rookie first-round pick Bo Nix looked out there, as well as some young defensive backs that have been stepping up. Sean Payton gushing about the running back position and giving us some insight into defensive lineman Eyioma Uwazurike. We got all that coming up and more on today's episode of the show. My name is Sayre Bedinger, co-host of Locked on Broncos here, as well as site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. Our co-host Cody, he's out moving today, but Broncos Country, he will be back soon. And today's episode, got to tell you, it's brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And we are on the doorstep of the NFL season. The dog days are almost over. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And Broncos Country, thank you so much for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so. For those of you that are everydayers, everyday listeners of the show, we appreciate you so much. And if you're not yet an everyday listener, we appreciate you ramping up. If you just listen a couple days of the week, or if you're just now discovering the show, go ahead, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's talk about Bo Nix, as right now, I think he's the one that's stacking days. And I don't think there's anything better that you can hear about a young quarterback at this stage of training camp than that he's stacking days together. That's huge. I mean, we talk about that with a lot of different players, whether it's in the context of, hey, this guy needs to stay healthy. We want him to start stacking these days. Or if a player needs a kind of a comeback season, they need to start stacking days. But for rookies, and especially at the quarterback position, the volatility is what's probably the most frustrating, right? You see a rookie go out there, oftentimes they may have one really good practice and they may come back and have a bunch of interceptions the next day. And you never know when these young guys are going to get into a funk, but it just feels as though Bo Nix has been on a steady sort of, he's been walking up the steps, the staircase of, becoming this team's franchise quarterback, if you will, all off season long. And I think yesterday when we talked about the practice recap, it really felt like Bo had turned this proverbial corner in terms of getting out there and really making a lot of plays, not just showing, okay, yeah, he seems to be picking things up well. He's making some nice throws here and there, but still a lot of rookie situations going on, few mistakes here and there, which are, you could live with those types of things. I think for Bo Nix, that practice yesterday, he really turned a corner. The final padded practice before, obviously, on Thursday when the Broncos took off the pads, they were just out there in shells. So what we saw from him, or what we heard about from him at day 8 of training camp, is just that he continued to impress. A number of good throws as he was working with the third offense on Thursday. A couple of notable throws that we heard about: Devon Vele in the back corner of the end zone. We heard that Bo had a great throw to Troy Franklin deep down the field at one point during practice. And I asked Cody, because Cody's out there at practice, what are these guys looking like? He said it was a solid day for all of these quarterbacks, honestly, in a number of different areas. Now, was it enough with Jarrett Stidham as the quarterback 1 on the day? Because let's just break that down really quickly. The order of operations here for the quarterbacks coming out was number 1, Jarrett Stidham; number 2, Zach Wilson; number 3, Bo Nix. The second day in a row that Zach Wilson has been working with the 2s, which is interesting. And then, of course, you got Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham kind of just flip-flopping places there. We didn't hear a ton from Jarrett Stidham as far as, man, he made this really big throw. I think when Jarrett Stidham is out there on the field, what I am getting the impression of is that he's operating the offense pretty efficiently. He's putting the ball in a good spot most of the time. He's not really making mistakes with the football, but he's also not necessarily pressing with the football a ton. It feels like Stidham has been kind of playing it safe this offseason. Now, that could be a lot by design. We don't know exactly what the Broncos are practicing in terms of situational stuff out there. Yesterday, it was third down stuff. Thursday, it could have been more of just installation type stuff. So we'll see when we get to these games how these guys really look in game situations. But at the same time, you do kind of want to hear if there's a legitimate chance that Jarrett could be the quarterback one. And at this point, I think the Broncos are kind of trying to keep the optics of that's still on the table. You have to go out there and make plays. You've got to go out there and win this quarterback competition. I was watching a clip from NFL Live with ESPN NFL insider Adam Schefter, and he went on there and he said, dating back to the pre-draft process, the Broncos had a man crush. That was his words, not mine. The Broncos had a man crush on Bo Nix, and Schefter said he believes that this job is Bo Nix's to lose, which to me indicates, and I've said this all offseason, if Jarrett Stidham wants to win the Broncos starting quarterback position, which at this point we're led to believe is still possible, if he wants to do that, he's going to have to go out there and take it, because right now the situation is that Bo Nix would have to play so horribly in preseason games, and he would have to start stringing together a lot of bad practices for the Broncos to even default to Jarrett Stidham. That's my take on the situation. That's my read on the position, on the position group. And if you've been listening to Locked On Broncos, you know that I've been saying all offseason, I think we're in a situation here where we're at point A, which is the unknown, and point B, which is the known, which is Bo Nix as the starter. When are we going to get to point B? That's obviously up to Sean Payton. But right now, it does feel like the Broncos are keeping the optics that this is an open competition. Of course, with Jarrett Stidham taking reps with the first team offense, there's really not optics. That's literally what they're doing. They're giving him an opportunity out there. So Broncos country, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about Jarrett Stidham still getting reps with the first team offense? Bo Nix is going to have to earn his spot. I do think that the Broncos are going to take this, at least past the first preseason game. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jarrett Stidham is the number one quarterback for that first preseason game. But when you start to think about kind of the timeline of everything, the Broncos will have joint practices after that Colts preseason game against the Green Bay Packers, followed by a home preseason game against the Packers. And for that Packers preseason game, I believe that the starting quarterback for that Packers preseason game will ultimately end up being the starter for the season. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Bo Nix was named the starting quarterback the week of that Packers preseason game. So in terms of just the timeline, Broncos country, nothing definitive at this point. The quarterbacks still rotating. Sounded like all three quarterbacks made some decent throws in this practice, but of course, the focus is first round pick Bo Nix. Everybody wants to see him get out there on the field as quickly as possible, and understandably so. The Broncos have never drafted and developed their own starting franchise quarterback, even though John Elway is kind of a technicality. That's a different episode for a different day there. But we all want to see Bo Nix get out there and be the starter. We all want to see him succeed. We all want to see him be that quarterback one as soon as possible. And certainly it does feel like things are trending that way. No matter who you listen to, no matter who you're, looking at on Twitter or X or whatever, the insiders around the league all seem to be pointing the same direction, which is that Bo Nix will eventually be the starting quarterback. And even in the case of what Adam Schefter said, that job is his to lose at this point. So somebody else got to go and take it if they want to. And speaking of taking jobs, we got cornerback position, not quarterback, but cornerback. There's some battles going on at the cornerback position this offseason. Some young players that have been standing out on this roster, and that continued on day 8 for Riley Moss and Ja'Quan McMillian. We're going to break out their standout days at practice up next on this episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's time to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Riley Moss and Ja'Quan McMillian were out there making plays on the ball, even without the pads on. These guys are going after the football and trying to make their case for positions within that starting lineup, especially when the Broncos keep three defensive backs out there. We're going to talk about Riley Moss, Ja'Quan McMillian, and maybe why reports or this idea that Riley Moss was a bust in the NFL draft, a little bit overplayed here as we start off today's episode and this edition of Locked On Broncos, where Broncos Country, we appreciate you so much every single day for tuning in, whether you make us a part of your day, if you're on the treadmill, if you're on your way to work, if you're on your way home from work, if you're working out, whatever you're doing and listening to Locked On Broncos or watching the show on YouTube. We can't tell you enough how much we appreciate you for making us part of your day every single day, and for your second listen every day. Check out Locked On NFL. A lot of great stuff happening over at the Locked On NFL channel as the season ramps up. But let's talk about these two young defensive backs. And of course, Riley Moss has been a topic of discussion all offseason because the Broncos traded up to get him in the third round of the 2023 NFL draft. And that was kind of a controversial decision because, of course, when the Broncos traded up to get him, they traded a future third round pick to do so. And fans of the NFL draft and fans of team building are sitting there thinking, why would you give up two pretty valuable picks to move up for a guy like Riley Moss, who not everybody there wasn't a general consensus about Riley Moss going into last year's draft. Let's just be honest about that. There were some people who viewed him as a day 2 pick, some people who viewed him as a day 3 pick. And a lot of questions about, was he going to play corner or is he going to play safety at the NFL? And then, of course, matters are complicated when Riley comes into his rookie training camp and he suffers that core muscle injury, keeping him out into the regular season. We really only got to see him play special teams last year. This training camp is the first time since Riley Moss's Iowa Hawkeyes days that anybody is really seeing him play the cornerback position, because nobody's privy to practice when you're in the regular season. And when he's getting back out there, we saw him get in the nickel and dime situations late last season. But in terms of where his ceiling is at on this roster in 2024, you really get the idea that Riley could be that starting cornerback opposite Pat Surtain on the outside. He's got the size, he's got the speed, and he certainly has the ball skills, which are on display. I was texting with Cody during practice, and he was talking about how Riley Moss really stood out, made plays in team, made plays in 7-on-7, 1-on-1s. And then, of course, you can go back, and if you want to continue the theme of stacking days at training camp, as we talked about with Bo Nix, it feels like Riley Moss is another player that's stacking days at Broncos training camp, because yesterday we talked about him coming up and stopping a 3rd and long situation, just really outstanding closing speed, instincts coming across the middle of the field. And you see the ball skills. There was a pass play in Wednesday's practice. That video was kind of surfacing of this play where Bo Nix took a snap, rolled out to his right, and found Marvin Mims for what would have been an easy first down gain. I mean, a really nice gain down the sideline, really well-placed ball, and Mims had it in his hand. And then Riley Moss comes in and knocks it out at the last second to force an incompletion. This guy has ball skills for days, and that's been the case ever since he got to the Iowa Hawkeyes program, where he wasn't even a scholarship player right away. So you see the athletic traits, you see the instinctive style of play, you see the ball skills. And where we really need to see this is in this first preseason game against the Indianapolis Colts. We need to see, especially because, man, that Colts team, they've got some athleticism at the wide receiver position. So Riley Moss is going to get tested very early on in this preseason with a couple of really outstanding matchups. When you talk about the Colts and their athletic receivers, then you talk about the Green Bay Packers, who, in my opinion, they probably have the deepest wide receiver group in the entire NFL. I mean, when you're talking 1 through 8 or 9 guys that could potentially be coveted by NFL teams, there's a lot of talent that the Broncos are going to be going up against this year in the preseason. And so Moss, he's not only being tested by the likes of Marvin Mims, Cortland Sutton, Josh Reynolds, Tim Patrick, but now he's going to be able to get matchups against these other guys and prove that he can be a starter on the outside. But you know who may have something to say about that? Well, that's Ja'Quan McMillian. And Ja'Quan McMillian, again, another player who, dating back to OTAs, I think has proven that he can be an asset for this defense. Jim Leonard, the defensive backs coach, and obviously Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator, they've been cross-training a lot of these cornerbacks between outside corner and inside the slot, because at any point in the season, you need to be able to have a group of your best 5 out there in whatever positions they need to be in. So let's say everybody's healthy at the start of the season. Maybe Ja'Quan McMillian does start on the outside, but in nickel, he comes and slides inside. That is going to be a possibility because of the way that he's been practicing this offseason, including at Thursday's practice, where I saw a number of tweets out there from Cody as well as others stating that Ja'Quan made some really nice plays on the football. And he's been doing this just like Riley Moss. He's been doing this forever. I mean, the guy was an All-American at East Carolina because he got his hands on the football a lot, and he's done it ever since he stepped foot on an NFL field. When we saw him get in a couple of years ago against the Chargers, what does he do? He immediately comes in. He should have had a pick 6. The referees, the officials took it away from him because they thought the ball hit the ground. It did not. And I think that we're going to bring that one up all the time here on Locked On Broncos. But not only that, we saw last year, one of the best in terms of getting his hands on the football on the Denver Broncos defense. As a matter of fact, you could argue that Ja'Quan McMillian was one of the key catalysts for the Denver Broncos getting back on track defensively last season. Somebody who just came in, he was picking off passes. He was forcing fumbles. He was causing havoc in the backfield as a pass rusher and run defense, where, again, that's another thing that I saw. And somebody was tweeting out practice observations. Sound like Ja'Quan made a 5-yard tackle for loss at one point. So there's a lot to like about these young defensive backs. And of course, we've already talked about Damari Mathis having a strong offseason as well. So maybe reports of the cornerback position in general being doomed this season were a little bit overblown. Of course, it's still early. It is still training camp, and we do need to see these guys, whether or not they're going to sink or swim against other competition that's coming in game situations. It's nice to hear about passes being broken up in practice. It's another thing to see these guys consistently putting reps together on the field in an actual game situation. And we are going to get a chance soon to see that as we're now in the month of August, and Broncos preseason is not far away, Broncos country. So we can't wait to see what these defensive backs are going to bring to the table. And Sean Payton discussed after practice big news regarding defensive lineman Eyioma Uwazurike. We're going to talk about that big news as well as Payton's thoughts on the running back position coming up here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's show is sponsored by FanDuel, and I love sports. I know that you do too. We love sports so much we never want them to stop, and we are almost, thankfully, out of the dog days of the NFL offseason. But sometimes when there's fewer games going on and there's not a lot of, sportsing like we want them to, well, we got FanDuel. It gives us the opportunity to keep sports going whenever we want. All we got to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime we're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. If you want to take a look at Denver Broncos rookie props, figure out what you want to smash the over on Bo Nix's total touchdowns for this season or passing touchdowns for this season. Maybe smash the over on the Broncos winning only 5.5 games this season. head over to FanDuel.com to look at odds and make the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Reinforcements for the Denver Broncos on the defensive line should be coming very soon, according to head coach Sean Payton, in the form of former fourth-round pick Eyioma Uwazurike. We're going to talk about the potential return of Uwazurike very soon for this Broncos team on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, as well as a couple of other major news and notes from Broncos training camp. But want to say thank you once again to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you for subscribing wherever you do listen to your podcast, as well as hit that subscribe button on YouTube as well if you haven't already. Broncos Country, we appreciate you so much for making us part of your day right here on the Locked On Sports Network. Broncos Country, let's talk about Eyioma Uwazurike, because this is a wild card factor in the defense that we've discussed briefly at times this offseason. And I think that a lot of people assumed, myself included, after we saw last year a number of players getting in trouble with the league for betting on games. We saw the Detroit Lions take a really they cut guys that bet on their own team's games. They just straight up cut these players. And so you kind of assumed after seeing that happen with a number of other teams that the Broncos were going to follow suit. And once Eyioma Uwazurike got in trouble with the league for betting on Broncos games, by the way, games that he played in. That's why he was suspended indefinitely for a minimum of 1 calendar year. We thought the Broncos were going to cut him, and we just thought they were going to say, you know what, that's unacceptable. We're not going to tolerate that on this team. We're done. You're done. We're going to let you go. That wasn't the case. In fact, Sean Payton even came out and was pretty fired up in the comments that we read and heard from him regarding Uwazurike being suspended for a full year and not being allowed anywhere near the team facility, right? Because when you think about something like this, of course, it's not an acceptable act by any means whatsoever. And it is something that would be worthy of cutting a player for if you felt like we just can't trust this guy. But if you really want to help the player and help the person get better, which it sounds like Uwazurike took the steps toward doing over the last year, it's really tough to not be able to have their support group around them. As these guys get drafted to the NFL, the football team really does become their closest support group. And people, coaches, players, teammates, all these sorts of things to pour into them. The Broncos weren't allowed to do that. They weren't allowed to have contact with Uwazurike over the last year. So now with him coming back, he's reportedly, according to Mike Kliss, he's taken steps, went to Gamblers Anonymous, things like that, and was really working his way back. Now, whether or not he can make an impact in the defensive line rotation remains to be seen. Of course, at this point, the NFL has yet to officially reinstate Eyioma Uwazurike, but Sean Payton did say they anticipate that happening, and he thinks he could be back very soon, was what he said after practice. And so I think the team is still excited about him. We heard George Payton reference Eyioma Uwazurike when talking about the team's defensive line depth earlier this offseason. The Broncos, I believe, were planning on him being a starter going into last season. And that's why we ended up seeing Jonathan Harris and Matt Henningsen and other players out there. Those guys were just the next men up after Eyioma Uwazurike got injured, because we saw glimpses in his rookie year of 2022. He had a couple of opportunities at the quarterback, a blocked kick, which is something he did back at Iowa State a number of times. And it's an area I think that you can't have too much depth when it comes to your defensive line group, right? When you're talking about a team like the Denver Broncos, where the defensive line was atrocious last year, both in terms of pass rush win rate as well as run stop win rate, you start to stack up these guys one on top of the other, and you say, okay, things are starting to look a lot better on paper with the additions of John Franklin Myers, Malcolm Roach, Angelo Blackson. Now you add Uwazurike back into the mix. That's 4 separate guys that weren't on the team last year who could make a substantial improvement to that unit this year. And we've already heard a lot of stuff early on at Broncos training camp. I mean, Zach Allen looking really good out there. John Franklin Myers bringing a level of physicality. Malcolm Roach having an infectious energy. Angelo Blackson sort of raising the floor in all facets. Now you add somebody like Uwazurike, who, when the Broncos drafted him in the 4th round back in 2022, a lot of people were saying this guy is an absolute steal of a draft pick. He should have gone in the 3rd round easily, and he's a big body. I mean, the Broncos, they need more big bodies. They need guys that can come in and disrupt passing lanes. And Uwazurike does give you added value on special teams, not necessarily as a gunner, but when he can get his long limbs up into the way of the field goal. And that's where he provides another additional asset, because he can do that. And he's done it repeatedly. So this is an exciting development for Sean Payton to come out and say that they fully anticipate him joining the team as soon as possible. Those are his words. They fully anticipate Eyioma Uwazurike joining the team as soon as possible. And it sounds like they expect it to happen very soon, according to Sean Payton. So we'll see. The Broncos could be getting some very important reinforcements back on the defensive line in the near future here. And as to more notes from Sean Payton after practice, we can't discuss enough the change from what he's seeing in Javante Williams and what I think a lot of other people are seeing in Javante Williams this year. Last season, I don't think any of us really knew what to expect from Javante. I think you kind of understandably expect him to be a little bit rusty, given the fact that he's first year coming off of major knee surgery, and he came back pretty quickly from it. Now that he's a 2nd season removed from that knee surgery, Sean Payton said that he's a completely different player this year than he was last year. So that speaks volumes in and of itself, Broncos country. And I've seen a number of tweets of Javante catching, touchdowns in the back of the end zone. He's looking better as a receiver. He's making more decisive cuts as a runner. And I think he's going to have a big chip on his shoulder after a lot of people, ourselves included, speculated, could he be a roster cut this year? Is he good enough to make this team after what we saw over 8-9 games to end last season, where he could barely get 3 yards a carry? I mean, the narrative is being rewritten as we speak with Javante Williams. The narrative is not necessarily being rewritten, though, for Jalil McLaughlin, the other running back in the mix, among what we believe to be the top 2 this year for the Denver Broncos. And Jalil has been receiving positive publicity pretty much all offseason. There's a lot of people who took notice of what he did on just over 100 touches last year for the Broncos. And this year, his role is going to increase. In fact, Sean Payton made a very interesting note during his post-practice press conference after day 8 for the Denver Broncos that Jalil, he's going to be asked, not all the time, but at times, he's going to be asked to stick his nose in there in pass protection. And he specifically noted in 2-minute situations, which I think that's a notable piece of what he said, because the 2-minute situation was pretty much exclusively Samaje Perine's job last year for the Denver Broncos. So Jalil, one way that the Broncos are going to try to increase his touches, it sounds like, could be by implementing him into their 2-minute offense, that was one of the most productive times of the game for the Denver Broncos all season last year. Whether we're talking about the end of the first half or the end of the game, the 2-minute situation was typically the area where the Broncos were able to have the most, I think, consistent success, which is why you had a lot of people calling for, hey, throw the Samaje Perine offense out there to begin the game. Obviously, you can't just do that all the time, but certainly exciting news for Jalil McLaughlin to be getting an increased workload. Sean Payton noted once again that, I mean, there's the security guy that's there 24 hours, and Jalil McLaughlin is the second guy in the building. Otherwise, he'd be the first guy in the building, right? So he's one of those players that's setting the example of working hard, and he did the same thing last year. That stood out to Sean Payton last year as well. So we know Jalil and Javante, I think, are going to have huge years this year for the Denver Broncos, at least the way Sean Payton has been talking about them. We also heard from PJ Locke after practice. Again, leadership is a big situation for him this year, in addition to taking on a huge role in the defensive backfield. But he talked about what he learned from Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson in being leadership, in terms of picking up where they left off, not necessarily replicating what they did, but taking what they taught him and using those pieces and leading in his own way. it's just great to hear from PJ Locke and to see where he's grown from being an undrafted guy to being a practice squad guy, special teams guy, an occasional contributor to the defense, to now being a key leader and starter on this defense. It's just great to see his rise, and he's having a great offseason as well. PJ actually talked about Bo Nix when he was asked about Bo Nix, as every player really is. And I thought he made an interesting note when he talked about Bo Nix. He said that Bo Nix is a great look-off guy when he's manipulating the safeties in practice. I think we saw an awesome example of that on Wednesday in a video that surfaced of Bo Nix completing a pass to Courtland Sutton deep down the right side of the field against zone coverage with Devin Key kind of late coming over. So Bo, he has the ability to look off these safeties, and PJ Locke is saying he's out there playing mind games with the safeties, and they're trying to kind of play mind games back and forth with him. So it speaks to not only the respect that this defense already has for the rookie quarterback, but also, I mean, Bo's comfortable enough out there. He's not just executing the offense. He's out there looking off safeties, and he's I'm not saying he's screwing around or anything like that, but he's doing things that are advanced in terms of making plays and manipulating defense. The dude is smart, Broncos country, and he's going to be, I think, a really good player and a really good fit for this offense with Sean Payton. So it's not necessarily always about having the number one pick, right? Sometimes you just want to get the guy that's the right fit. And of course, you'd love to have an opportunity at a generational talent if there is one available. But I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that the Broncos got Bo Nix out of this draft class, the 6th quarterback taken in the first round of the 2024 NFL draft. And it sounds like his teammates are excited as well. But Broncos country, we appreciate you so much for making us your first listen of the day today. If you haven't already, check out Locked On NFL as well for your second listen. We're going to be back to break down tomorrow's practice and what the Broncos do. What's the quarterback rotation going to look like? Who else is going to stand out? Who's going to be making a name for themselves as we get closer and closer to that first preseason game? We'll break all that down on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.